Happy WrestleMania season, everybody. What's going on? GoodMicWork back at you with a quick little disclaimer before you start listening to this. As I do every year during WrestleMania season, I try to get up a lot of different and random WrestleMania-themed videos to kind of get us in the mood for WrestleMania every year. And last year was no different, did a whole bunch of different types of episodes, including a very long, 2.5 hour long podcast-style top 10 countdown of my personal favorite WrestleManias of all time. And, of course, on YouTube, things are sketchy, and the video got pulled down a few weeks after I uploaded it due to a small copyright match in my B-roll. So I removed that portion of the copyrighted content and re-uploaded the video a few weeks later, and just a couple of weeks after that, WWE took it down again, those bastards. This time it was for literally like 6 seconds of footage of like Hogan body slamming Andre. So I'm like, fuck me. So I'm going to have to re-upload it again at some point. But you know what? I put it on the back burner and kind of left it alone for a little while. So it was always my plan to kind of re-upload that this year for WrestleMania. The only problem is within the past year, I've also switched computers. It would be possible for me just to put the original version back up. However, I'd have to jump through a lot of hoops with the editing to dig up all of that old footage on that old machine. So I didn't really want to bother with that. So what I decided to do is take this old podcast and chop it up. And I'm going to give you guys one snippet of this per day for the next 10 days, counting down my favorite WrestleManias of all time. And that should add a lot of just fun, random content to the channel. These videos probably won't get a ton of views, but at least it will put some WrestleMania stuff on my channel. And I have a lot planned for the rest of March. You're also going to get a really fun podcast and review uploaded on Sunday, March 15th. I also have a This Day in History planned for March 17th and a This Day in History planned for April 1st. In addition to that, you're going to see me a lot during WrestleMania weekend. We'll be doing live streams and reviews following the Hall of Fame, NXT TakeOver, and of course WrestleMania itself and the post-WrestleMania Monday Night Raw. So get used to seeing me. All right, that is it for the disclaimer. I'm only going to say this once. I will not say this at the beginning of every single one of these videos you see. I just wanted to give you an explanation of where this content came from. And incidentally, if you would like to listen to the podcast version of this, you can still do that. It's always been available on my website. As a matter of fact, I'll put a link right down in the description below if you want to download the MP3. And if you dig through the archives of Stitcher and iTunes and Spotify and sites like that, you can probably find it there as well. All right, that's enough of that. I will shut my mouth now and let you guys enjoy my top 10 WrestleManias, starting with WrestleMania 8, and we will pick up my comments in progress. And we're going to start with number 10, and that is WrestleMania 8. Now, this Mania made it on the list just barely. There were so many I wanted to put in its place, and this is one of the WrestleManias on this list that I'm including purely for personal reasons and personal nostalgia and my own personal memories of this show. I watched it in my living room with my family in 1992. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a beautiful spring day out. We had all the windows open in the house, and my parents were always cool about giving me or buying WrestleMania for me every year. They wouldn't get all the pay-per-views for me when I was young, but they would always hook me up with WrestleMania. So WrestleMania 8, I fully understand that this WrestleMania might not be on everybody's top 10. It might not be on anybody's top 10, but it's on mine. Two reasons. Number one, two of the best championship matches in WrestleMania history, in my opinion, took place on this card with the world title and the Intercontinental title. We had Bret Hart taking on Roddy Piper for the Intercontinental title. I've talked about this match many times in the past. I watch it all the time. As a matter of fact, I watched this match just a few days ago. And I've been a huge Bret Hart fan all my life. You guys know that. And my love for Bret Hart didn't start when he became world champion. It started when he was in the Hart Foundation back in the 80s. So when Bret Hart beat Mr. Perfect at SummerSlam 1991, I was thrilled. I couldn't be happier. And I about lost my damn mind when the fucking Mountie defeated Bret Hart at a house show, no less, in early 1992. And I believe the Mountie in that house show match was attacking Bret Hart. Roddy Piper came out to make the save, setting up Roddy Piper versus the Mountie for the Intercontinental title at the Royal Rumble. We all know what happened. Piper beat him. Mountie had one of the shortest IC title reigns in history, and Piper went on to WrestleMania to defend the title against Bret Hart. The two of them were practically family and had a ton of respect for each other, and this was not something you saw very often back then in the 90s. It was pretty rare to have babyface matches. We had one at WrestleMania 6 with Hogan and Warrior. We had one at SummerSlam just a few months after this with Bret and Davey. But to see Bret and Piper out there for the Intercontinental title turned out to be one of the most memorable WrestleMania matches of all time. And I loved the backstage promo with Mean Gene standing in between them and the two guys getting in each other's face. They would do something similar a couple of years later at the King of the Ring with Bret Hart and Mr. Perfect, which I always like. So interviews like this, I always marked out for, especially during this time. And the two guys had some pushing and shoving. They went out to the ring pissed off with each other, and they had a pretty vicious brawl. They were both trying to one-up the other, both playing tricks on each other. Bret at one point, I think, played possum on Rowdy Piper and almost caught him with a quick small package 3 count. Roddy Piper tricked Bret Hart into checking his shoelaces and nailed him with a little short punch, and Bret got a little color after that, so we had blood in this match. And these two guys that were friends were out there kicking the shit out of each other, and it was one of the best wrestling matches that Roddy Piper ever had. And I just still always smile when I watch this match. And Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby Heenan were on the call for this WrestleMania, and they were a very big part of why I think this match and the match I'm going to talk about later were so memorable, at least to me in my wrestling mind. There was no better team than Gorilla Monsoon and Bobby Heenan, and those guys were fucking fantastic, and they put over this match huge, especially Bobby the Brain Heenan, and the finish is one of my favorite finishes in a match of all time as well. Roddy Piper has got the bell. He goes on the outside of the ring after the referee gets knocked down, grabs the bell, contemplates waffling Bret Hart with it, which is what Heenan wanted him to do, and kind of wrestles with his conscience a little bit, winds up tossing the belt out of the ring, puts the sleeper hold on Bret Hart instead, and Bret Hart is able to kick off and push back off the top turnbuckle into a pinning combination, and the referee slowly crawls over and counts the very slow 1, 2, 3, and you saw the crowd, the audience kind of stand up during the 1 and 2 count. They all knew it. There's even a Roddy Piper fan right in the front row that's damn near losing his mind. Very cool and unique finish, and one that they would recreate several times. They would do it a few years later in 1996 with Bret Hart and Steve Austin at the Survivor Series, and I know they've even used this finish in more recent times, and I think it's escaping me now, but I want to say within the last year, they've done this a couple of times on TV, so you guys are going to have to refresh my memory on that. But the end of the match, of course, saw Roddy Piper take the belt from the referee, hand it to Bret Hart, help him up, put the belt around his waist, and Bret Hart, with blood all over his face, regains the Intercontinental title and becomes a 2-time Intercontinental champion. Very memorable, and it was one of the only times that Roddy Piper was ever beat. Up until that point, I don't know how long he'd been in the business, maybe 15 years around that point. I don't think he had been pinned. I mean, Piper always protected himself, and he was always about business first and what was best for him. And for him to, I guess, allow Bret Hart to pin him, for Piper to have enough respect for Bret Hart to let him pin him but not Hogan, I think speaks volumes to what kind of dude Roddy Piper was, and I miss him. I miss him a lot. Thank you, Piper, for putting over Bret. One of my favorite WrestleMania matches of all time. And in another favorite WrestleMania match of all time was the WWE title match, which was not the main event. It was not the final match. It was billed as a double main event. The final match I'll talk about here in a minute with Hogan and Sid, but Randy Macho Man Savage took on Nature Boy Ric Flair for the WWE title, and what's interesting about this match is that it turned out to be one of my favorite matches in WrestleMania history, and it wasn't even supposed to happen. They were going with Hogan and Flair. To this day, I don't understand why they did not go with Hogan and Flair. How do you not do that match at WrestleMania? But I'll tell you this, Savage and Flair, I think, had a much better match than Hogan and Flair ever would have. And those two guys had such a memorable match at WrestleMania that it made me almost forget about or be able to tolerate and live with the fact that WWE dropped the ball huge by not doing Hogan and Flair. And Savage and Flair, even their storyline was just slapped together last minute. Because prior to this, Savage had been feuding with Jake the Snake. The whole Cobra in the wedding gift that happened way back at SummerSlam 1991. Savage getting reinstated, having that long, brutal feud with Jake the Snake Roberts. If you ask me, Jake and Savage should have worked Mania, and Hogan and Flair should have worked Mania. But instead, they wrapped up the Jake and Savage feud on Saturday night's main event, and that's when The Undertaker turned babyface. And then Savage had to switch gears and start moving into a feud with Ric Flair. And back then, it seemed like all of Savage's really intense feuds all centered around Elizabeth. You know, when the Mega Powers exploded, it was all about Elizabeth. When Jake and Randy were feuding, it was all about Jake fucking with Elizabeth, and he slapped her and all of that. And now we are into a feud with Ric Flair, and WWE does the same thing. Ric Flair was claiming that he was with Miss Elizabeth before she was with Randy Savage. They had those doctored photos, and Ric Flair and Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, of course, was injured at that point. Bobby Heenan couldn't be on the road with Ric Flair because he couldn't keep up with him, so they put Perfect with him, and Perfect and Flair were threatening to reveal this big poster exposing Miss Elizabeth. I don't know if she was supposed to be nude or in her underwear or what the hell they were doing. They never did reveal this thing, but they were threatening to. Of course, Savage is completely insane as it is, and now he's really pissed. And the match was just so much fun. I got to give a lot of credit again to Gorilla and Bobby for really putting this match over. Bobby Heenan, much like he was at the Royal Rumble when he was calling Ric Flair's victory in that a couple of months earlier, he was losing his shit. Absolutely hilarious, so entertaining watching Bobby Heenan freak out. The match was fun, and for 1992, it's a type of match you didn't see a whole lot of. If you saw something like this now, no one would bat an eye at it. But back then, to have a match so loaded with outside interference and cheating and officials and pull-aparts and brawls and blood, this whole thing was a clusterfuck. You know, the match itself was fun because Savage and Flair are fucking pros. You know, but when you add Perfect and you add all the cheating going on, and then Ric Flair getting busted open on the guardrail, whole side story to that because Bret had been busted open in the previous match, and the story goes, at least the way Bret Hart tells it in shoot interviews and in his book, Ric Flair and Randy Savage got in a lot of trouble for having blood in their match because during that time there was a no blood policy. Bret Hart and Piper did not get in trouble because WWE believed that Bret's was hard way and Flair's was clearly a blade job. So it's funny that Flair and Savage got in trouble. I think they got fined for that, and nothing happened to Bret Hart at all. Even though when you watch that Bret Hart and Piper match, you can clearly see where Bret is cutting himself. So I don't know why he thinks he did such a good job of concealing it from WWE, because as fans, we can all see it. It's plain as day. I don't think Bret was any less obvious than Flair, but for some reason, Flair and Savage got busted and Bret didn't. But anyway, that's beside the point. The match itself was exciting as hell. Savage, of course, is nuts and just furiously angry, trying to defend the honor of his lady. After all of the cheating and the outside interference by Mr. Perfect, eventually they start really working over Savage's leg. I think Perfect nails him right in the knee, I think, with a steel chair. And right when Ric Flair is about to put on the figure four, he goes to punch Savage. Savage blocks it, punches Flair, spins him around, rolls him up with a handful of tights, and gets the 1, 2, 3. Crowd goes nuts. Elizabeth is happy. Flair can't believe it. Perfect can't believe it. They're going nuts. Flair is so pissed off that he actually approaches Randy Savage and Liz in the corner, grabs a hold of Elizabeth, and forces a kiss right on her face. Yeah, doesn't age well. Doesn't age well at all. That's not something that would ever fly today in any way, shape, or form. And as soon as Ric Flair does that, Savage loses it, jumps on Ric Flair, attacks him. You got all the WWE officials out there. You got Dave and Earl Hebner. You got Strongbow out there. You got Tony Gurria, Rene Goulet, a very young Shane McMahon. Really cool to see all those old-time legends out there trying to pull apart these guys. And for Savage, for a guy that we always hear about behind the scenes being so psychotic and protective and jealous over Miss Elizabeth, you know, for him to allow another man just to grab her and kiss her like that, I mean, how crazy could Savage really have been? You know what I mean? Would you want anybody doing that to your girl? So all these stories of Savage locking Liz in a locker room and not letting her out and stuff, I think those are all exaggerated. But again, completely beside the point. Finally, when all of the smoke clears and the dust settles and they get everybody out of the ring, Savage and Liz are left in the ring all by themselves to celebrate. They have fireworks going off. And then backstage after the match, and one of my favorite WrestleMania moments and interviews of all time. We had an interview from Ric Flair and Randy Savage. I really miss these days. Back in these early WrestleManias, they would always have pre-match and in a lot of cases post-match interviews backstage with Mean Gene or Sean Mooney or whoever, and they were always a lot of fun. And Flair and Perfect and Bobby Heenan had come down from the announce booth by this point, and the three of them are going nuts in the locker room doing an interview with Sean Mooney. He then kicks it over to Mean Gene, who interviews Savage and Liz in one of my favorite Randy Savage promos of all time, when Gene says, "Randy, some people feel that was a questionable victory. You had a handful of tights," and Savage is like, "Ooh, do I care? I don't even care." I just love that promo. I mean, he looked so psychotic. His eyes were wide open. You were scared shitless of Randy Savage. I sure as hell was. And you could feel it. You know, you really could. You could feel it in his voice. It felt real. And like I said, you had to be there. It's one thing to go back and watch tape. If you remember this and you watched it when it happened, the feeling and the memories are indescribable. You can't buy it. You can't purchase it. And it's nothing you're ever going to be able to experience on the WWE network. And it's just a match and a moment and a memory that I'll never forget. And it's one of the big reasons why WrestleMania is on my top 10. And one of the less memorable matches on the card, but a really memorable finish, was the main event. Hulk Hogan versus Sid. Once WWE switched gears and moved away from Hogan and Flair, moved on to Savage and Flair, and then they made Hogan work with Sid, and the two of them, of course, had the beef at the Royal Rumble when Hulk Hogan, like a complete crying, whiny little bitch, cheats and pulls Sid Justice out of the Royal Rumble, allowing Ric Flair to win the WWE title. And an interesting stat about Hulk Hogan that I thought about in terms of the Royal Rumble. Do you realize this guy was only in 4 Royal Rumbles? He won 2 and he lost 2. And in the 2 that he lost, he illegally eliminated somebody else. Back in 1989, when Big John Studd won, Hogan pulled out the Big Boss Man. And then here in 1992, he yanks out Psycho Sid. So if you ask me, Sid should have been the babyface in this match because he was the one screwed over. They did the tag team. Well, they had made up first. Then they had a tag match on that Saturday night's main event show against Flair and Taker. Sid turned on Hogan, setting up this big WrestleMania match. And the backstory and the side story here is that WWE was starting to build this as potentially Hulk Hogan's last match. Now, I think in reality, he was going off to film Mr. Nanny, but didn't know if he was going to be back. And he had clearly dropped a lot of weight. Hogan physically was looking a lot different during this time because this was kind of when the steroid scandal had started to catch fire and a lot of guys were dropping weight and getting off the gas, and Hogan was one of them, and he just didn't look the same. And the match with Sid, I don't know, I thought they could have done more with it. The whole thing ended in a disqualification. Can you believe that? The main event of WrestleMania ended in a disqualification. Yes, I know I am crazy for putting this WrestleMania in my top 10 just for that reason alone, but I still have just a lot of fond memories of this show. And after Sid and Hogan go to that DQ, by the way, Papa Shango, Godfather, Charles Wright, completely missed his cue. He was supposed to come out and interfere in this match while Hogan was hitting the leg drop. He didn't come out there, and I guess Sid had no choice but to kick out of the leg drop, which I don't believe was planned from what we've heard throughout the years behind the scenes. Papa Shango finally does make his way to the ring, attacks Hulk Hogan. Sid and Papa are working him over, and that's when you hear the Warriors music. Warrior had left at SummerSlam 1991, pretty much was let go or released or fired, or maybe he quit, depending on who you believe. He makes his return here in the main event in one of the most memorable pops I can ever remember. When Ultimate Warrior hit the ring, just look at that audience. Just look at it right there. I mean, look at them going nuts. They are literally coming out of their seat, and I was doing the same thing. He looked a lot different. Hair was shorter, and much like Hogan, he was a lot smaller than the last time we saw him. And it's really funny. There's always been that urban legend that when the Warrior returned in 1992, that it was a different guy because he was smaller and he looked a lot different. People didn't think he was the same guy. Sometimes I can't believe the stupidity of some of these urban legends. Yes, the Ultimate Warrior did look a little bit different, but it was clearly him. You know, there was no question about it at all. Yes, he looked a little different, but not enough to make you think it was a different dude. Just because he has paint on his face? No. It was the exact same guy. It was Jim. He just looked a lot different. He had dropped a lot of weight, and he wouldn't be there long because he would, I think, get caught for another steroid violation just a few months after this, and he would be bumped from the Survivor Series pay-per-view and let go by WWE. So Warrior's return, as awesome as it was, probably made WWE and Vince feel really good. If Hogan is going to take off and go do a movie, they kind of replace and fill that void with the Warrior, but it really didn't pan out or work out. But still, a very memorable return the night that the Ultimate Warrior came back, because the fans went out of their mind. As far as what else happened at WrestleMania 8, nothing really worth noting. A lot of throwaway matches. Owen Hart versus Skinner, Rick Martel versus Tatanka. The show did open up with Shawn Michaels, who was just a few weeks removed from the barbershop incident with Marty Jannetty. He took on Tito Santana, who was the Matador, or El Matador at that time, and Tito put him over. To me, much like Hogan and Flair, this was another missed opportunity as well. I don't know why they didn't do Marty and Shawn. I can't remember why Marty took time off and didn't come back, and they didn't do a big match between the two of them, I think, until Royal Rumble of the next year. Like, Marty was out for like a year. So I think they should have done Marty and Shawn at WrestleMania, also done Hogan and Flair. This might have been a completely different looking WrestleMania had the original plans actually took place. But Shawn opened up the show and got a win over Tito Santana. The rest is history with Shawn's career. He would go on to become Mr. WrestleMania. Man, did I talk about WrestleMania 8 for a long time. What are we now, 24 minutes in? And we're only on number 9. I better speed things up here, or we are going to be here until WrestleMania 37.